going on, Celtics Nation? What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of Vitamin C's with me, Mr. Adam Taylor, with my co-host, my homie, my compadre, Mr. Tim Shields. Before we get into the good stuff, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button. Make sure you leave a comment and do all that good stuff. Show us some love. If you don't know who I am by now, my name's Adam Taylor. I write for CelticsBlog.com, Heavy.com, Odds Checker US, and you can find me anywhere that Celtic social media is floating around in the interweb. My boy Tim here, he's over at CLNS Media doing all those videos that you see. Tim's usually edited. He's usually doing all the cool background work, and now he's coming to the forefront to give everybody his takes, his opinions, and all things Boston Celtics. We're going to dive right into him. We're going to jump straight into this one today.
I'm with it, sure.
Yeah. So the reason we're recording this one, we were planning on looking at, we're doing this trade season primer where we looked at the point guards last time. The plan was to look at wings this time, wings that would fit what the Celtics need. That one's been pushed off. We're going to do that in a day or two because Hoops Hype released, I'd call it like maybe their trade season primer. I don't know what you'd really class it as, but Hoops Hype released something today. And according to some insider intel that Hoops Hype has, it seems like the Celtics have been engaged in discussions for Jeff Green and possibly Jalen Smith. And I want to talk about it. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that one of the outgoing pieces most likely would be Dennis Schroeder, as well as potentially Aaron Nesmith has been made available. So interesting little wrinkles in there. But let's get into the trade targets because I think that's really where the interesting stuff is.
Yeah, so we'll start with Jeff Green, former Celtic, returning to the Celtics. Same guy that Danny Ainge traded Kendrick Perkins to acquire. Same guy that Danny Ainge then traded away, 3 years later? It's like technically 4 seasons, but it was like 3 years because it was half a season when he got traded in, half a season when he got traded out. And they got back absolutely nothing. I think Austin Rivers is probably the only guy that people would really remember, and Austin Rivers never played a moment in Boston. You know what I mean? So, but Jeff Green's played a fair amount of games in Boston, and I feel like it was one of those where, and this feels like Jeff Green's career as a whole, right? It was one of those where he had a super high ceiling, but just never figured out how to get there. And he became this multifaceted, super reliable bench throughout his career, not in Boston, but he became this super reliable bench contributor that has morphed into this small ball 5 wrecking ball that can also play the 4, get you some buckets off the bench, can do a little ball handling, can give you some rebounding. But for me, the most important thing is he's going to bring a winning mentality into that locker room. He's going to join a core of Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and I'm even going to throw in, and he's not a core guy, but Josh Richardson as well, because I think the idea of having Josh Richardson and Jeff Green coming off the bench together is super valuable, in my opinion. I really like the idea of having that as a part of the rotation. And, if you got to move on from Dennis Schroeder, I'm not too bothered. Aaron Nesmith sucks, but he's not playing anyway. I'd rather bring in somebody that Udoka is going to give minutes to. And as the Hoops Hype report said, Brad Stevens has coached Jeff Green. He knows what type of locker room presence he is. He knows what type of player will be coming through the door, and he's possibly going to be giving Udoka another player that's actually going to play an impactful role on this team. And the downside is age. Where you at with this, man?
I think it makes sense, especially if you're giving up Dennis Schroeder for him. Like if it's a 1-for-1, or if you're maybe throwing in a second rounder, because he is under contract until 2023. So you get a little bit more cap control than you would with Dennis Schroeder. I honestly feel like it makes a lot of sense. When I thought about it before with Jabari Parker, my ideal role for Jabari Parker is what Jeff Green is right now, where you have a guy who can play the 4 and the 5, who's that small ball veteran, who's been a journeyman, who has experience, played with a lot of different guys. It is good with operating with those kind of egos. Jeff Green is turned his career into just something dependable. And like you said, like as soon as he left Boston, he went on this trip of just so many different rosters and teams, and now he's able to be a staple piece in a rotation. So from a Celtics perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense. He not only has familiarity with Brad Stevens when he coached him back in Boston, but he was also with the Nets when Ime Udoka was still there. So he actually has familiarity with both Udoka and Stevens. So I think there's not really a stretch of the imagination as to why they're connected to him now. And I think if they bring him in, especially if the cost is low or if it's just Dennis Schroeder, it makes a lot of sense because you're going to end up clearing up minutes for Peyton Pritchard. You're going to be able to give a bigger role to Josh Richardson if you don't deal him in a trade. And I like that a lot. And you're getting a veteran guy who can play at the 4 and the 5, and it helps sway a little bit of those power forward minutes, and it allows you to go with a smaller lineup in crunch time if you'd like to.
I mean, the other thing for me, and I kind of wrote this, I done an aggregation piece for this for heavy.com. I also aggregated it for Celtics blog, to be fair. So I aggregated it twice. And one of the things I wrote for one of the pieces for heavy was, there's a reason Jeff Green is being picked up every year now by a contending team. It's because he's, as you say, he's reliable. He plays his role. He understands that his job is to be a star in his role. You know, that's a Brad Stevens saying, and it's something that Jeff Green has kind of embodied over the last 5-6 years. The reason the Denver Nuggets picked him up in the offseason was before Michael Porter Jr. went out with his back surgery? I think it was back surgery. Before Michael Porter Jr. went out needing back surgery and he was out for the whole season, the plan was that once Jamal Murray came back, the Nuggets felt like they were going to be a contending team again. That's another team that's got like a quote-unquote big four. You know, they had Murray, Jokic, Kevin Porter Jr. Is it Kevin? Michael Porter Jr. And then who was the other guy I was going to say? Aaron Gordon. So they felt that way too. Things haven't gone that way. Michael Porter Jr. is out for the season. Jamal Murray, you know, by the time he comes back, you've still got to wait for him to figure out his conditioning, figure out his touch and feel on the floor. Their window for being a contender doesn't seem to be open this year. PJ Dozer's out for the season as well, ex-Celtic. Rest up PJ Dozer. So for Denver to feel like they could possibly move on from Jeff Green to get a point guard back that's going to take some of that pressure off Jamal Murray, I'm completely down with that. I mean, I'm just looking at his contract here as well. So they signed him on a $4.5 million deal, according to Spotrac. The Nuggets did for Jeff Green. It's a 2-year deal, but the second option is a player option. So, you know, if Jeff Green comes over to Boston, there's still potential that he comes off the books at the end of the season, or he might opt into it because he's happy and kind of, you know, wants to help this team take the next step. Maybe he has a good relationship with Ime Udoka. So I get it from both sides. For Boston, they get a player that they're actually going to give minutes to that could fill a position of need off the bench. And you've got that small ball 5 option that you lost with Jabari Parker. And for the Nuggets, you know, you'll bring him back a Dennis Schroeder type guy, or maybe they feel like Aaron Nesmith's going to be the guy to open the floor up more for Campazzo or whoever else they want to run at guard while they wait for Murray. Other option is you could always just swing a couple of second rounders at Denver and pick Jeff Green up and just absorb him into a TPE. Maybe Denver want to open up a roster space themselves. It's still possible. I'm just not sure Boston would do that because of the luxury tax. I don't think they want to be a luxury tax paying team this year, because why do you want to pay the tax when you know, effectively you suck? So why would you want to do that? I do think that if they do this, it's going to be for a Dennis Schroeder or possibly Aaron Nesmith. But there is an option there to bring him in without sending anything back out.
And that's the good thing too. And even we talked about it before in our last trade primer. If they were to deal out Dennis Schroeder, I think they have a TPE that's big enough that they can just absorb Jeff Green. And so they'll create another TPE for the size of Dennis Schroeder's contract. So the never-ending carousel of trade exceptions just keeps going and going and going. And I guess that's the beauty of it. It's a gift that keeps on giving, and it gives them a lot of financial flexibility. But I think we could put the bow on that, but I think we're both agreed Jeff Green makes a lot of sense to add to this roster, especially at the cost given.
Trading Dennis Schroeder makes a lot of sense for this roster, especially at any cost given.
Yeah, true.
You know, people know how I feel on Dennis Schroeder by now. And if you're new to the channel, I'm pretty sure you've very quickly figured out how I feel about Dennis Schroeder. Which leads us on to Mr. Jalen Smith, a guy that I was absolutely enormously high on coming into the draft. You know, he's been in the league. This is his second year in the league. And the problem was when he was playing in college, when he was projected coming up into the NBA, he was a big man that could rim run, could rebound, could stretch the floor and shoot the free. You know, he looked like he had a bit of athleticism to him, some physicality to him. He gets to the NBA and he can't do shit. Like, it's just not worked for him so far. I don't know whether that's the role he's been asked to play, the pace that he's been asked to play for Phoenix, you know, that 0.5 offense. But the problem is that that's what Boston are trying to build up to, that 0.5 offensive principle, playing fast, making quick decisions, making reads, and empowering the players to read and react to what they see on the floor and call sets for themselves. Now, if that's the reason why Jalen Smith struggled to produce, there's no point bringing him to Boston. The other downside for me, and I want your opinion on this, you trade for Jalen Smith and you don't send out Enes Kanter as part of any deal that brings you Jalen Smith, right? Well, isn't Jalen Smith effectively your 4-4 fifth string center at that point? Because he's not going to go ahead of Robert Williams. He's not going ahead of Al Horford. He won't go ahead of Enes Kanter, I doubt, because at least Kanter gives you a big, strong body when you need a banger down low. So he's going to come in at fourth string. Possibly, like, where your minutes going to come from? The reason that Phoenix are trading you, the reason that you're going into free agency because they turned down your rookie extension, is because you're not getting minutes. And when you get them, you're not producing. And there is a caveat to turning down that rookie extension, which we will touch on in a moment. But for now, what's your feeling on that, man?
I think personally, you're taking a dice roll on a guy who's only 21 years old. He's going to be 22 in about 3 months. So he'll be 22 before the NBA season is done. And he's a 10th overall pick. You know, he's a former lottery pick, and I think a lot of it comes down to the Suns not playing him. And again, I know there is the pressure of when you have minutes, you need to produce. But that kind of sounds like all of the young guys in Boston right now, where if you don't get minutes, you don't get playing time, you're just going to disappear into the ether of this rotation. Like Ime Udoka will bury you in the rotation if you can't contribute right away. But given his position, given the position that he plays, his size, his length, his ability to at least stretch the floor a little bit more than a guy like Enes Kanter or Enes Freedom, rather, I think this is a good upgrade. And again, you do have to move Freedom. And I don't think anybody in Boston has any issue with doing that. I don't think that's going to be a difficult thing to do. You can use him as an aggregated salary in a deal. But the one caveat, I think, does come down to that contract, as you said. So Phoenix declined his player option. So I don't understand as to why, but as you can see from Keith Smith, if you don't follow him, you should. He's excellent with salary cap stuff. But basically, they declined his rookie scale team option for 2022, 2023. So essentially, anyone who is trying to sign him, if you are the team that trades for him, or if you're the Phoenix Suns, you can only pay him $4.7 million. So that kind of kills his trade value in a way, because if anybody trades for him and he does well, or you give him a role in which he can do well, he might price you out in the offseason because you can only pay him $4.7 million.
And here's the caveat, I thought, another team can come in and offer whatever the hell they like.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, at the same time, I get the notion of, well, yeah, they can come and offer whatever the hell they like, but really, how high are they going to be willing to go for a big man that hasn't really showed anything yet? Look, don't get me wrong. I still think that big men are notorious for developing slower than any other position on the floor. Rob Williams is in his, fourth year now? And we're only starting to see the Rob Williams that we all hope to see now. Big men just develop slower. There's more to the game for them. And for someone like Jalen Smith that's multifaceted, that has to develop that three-point shot because it's a huge part of who he is as a player, but also needs to learn some post moves because he ends up in the low block and the dunker spot quite a bit. There's a lot to learn, and it's a big process, especially when you're trying to ask a guy to rim run, set a screen, maybe go screen or come off a flare into the corner, like onto the wing and shoot a three, or, you know, run a dribble handoff sequence, enter a ram screen sequence, and then all of a sudden you're down on the low block getting an outside impasse, and now you need to use some footwork. There's so much that goes into being a viable center these days, especially one that's meant to be stretching the floor too, that it's not going to be a linear progression by any means. My only counterpoint to that is you have to be a team that can afford to play him. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Houston Rockets make a bunch of sense to me because they can afford him 10 to 15 minutes, and they can figure that stuff out. Do you know what I mean? 10 to 15 minutes a night playing behind Christian Wood. But then they've got Sengun, so they're really going to want to limit Sengun for Jalen Smith. It's finding a team where he will stick and at least get minutes for this season. And Boston is not that team, dude. And so for that reason, I think that's more smoke than it is anything else. And I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, and I think that's fair to an extent. If he's gonna need minutes to develop, again, like we talked about before with Udoka, he just doesn't play his rookies or his young guys a lot. You have to be able to come in and produce in those minutes. And it seems like Jalen Smith, it seems like he's turning a corner at least this season. But a lot of that had to do with the fact that Phoenix had so many people who were either hurt or out due to COVID protocols. They went and called Bismack Biyombo, and now he's signed for the rest of the season. So good for Bismack. It looks like he's in great shape. So there's that. But Jalen Smith specifically, I like Houston in a way because Houston can take that dice roll. And maybe if they're trying to give Sengun minutes, then they go ahead and they flip Christian Wood to a team who might want another big man. But for
Yeah, that makes
Boston,
sense.
yeah, I think for Boston, they just need more youth at that position outside of Robert Williams and Grant, because Grant's becoming more and more like a 4 and a really, really small ball 5. So I don't know. I think if you're Boston, you really would have to commit to giving him minutes. I agree. But yeah, I guess it really just comes down to cost. What is going to be the cost to acquire a guy like this?
And that's the thing, right? And to me, it's not even about cost. It's about the point of you don't need him. The only way I can see you needing him is if you're planning on moving on from Freedom. If you're planning on moving on from Freedom, by all means, bring in a Jalen Smith. I was trying to think of a better word. A project big, that'd be it. By all means, bring in a project big that you're going to spend, place him down in Maine and then call him up whenever you need him or whenever you think the matchups are going to be favorable to him to build some confidence, build some reps. But if you're bringing him in and Freedom's still on that roster, then you're being unfair to him as a player because there's no path to development for him. And I'm completely out on that because at the end of the day, and I say this a lot, you have to understand while it's a business, this is still people's careers. And if a player doesn't develop, their career in the NBA is all but done. And then they have to go on this arduous journey of trying to rebuild themselves and come back into the NBA down the line in their career. And while it does happen, it's very rare. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
number of players that tank out of the league and come back later and find a way of sticking is the percentage is minimal compared to the amount that tank out each year. So I think that if I was Jalen Smith's agent, I'd be saying to him, like, yo, even if you get traded to Boston, we need to be thinking about what we're going to do at the end of the season. Because even if they did trade for him, I don't see a reason why he would re-sign there.
Yeah.
So I'm completely out on that deal.
Yeah.
Jeff Green, I'm in on. Jalen Smith, I don't want no piece of it. And I like Jalen Smith. That's why I want to see him go to a team that will give him the minutes to let him develop.
I guess the one way I could look at it is if they're looking at Jalen Smith, it at least means that they're looking to move on from Ennis Freedom. And it also kind of gives credence to what we were talking about, I think on another podcast, or maybe I was talking about it on the pregame show. But they kind of need some more depth behind the center spot, behind Rob and Al, because they just don't have anything that they can depend upon. Like your third center is Ennis Freedom, and he's barely getting minutes, and you're running double big sets with Al Horford and Robert Williams, or you're sliding Grant in at the 4, or maybe you're going super small, which we've started to see a little bit. But if they're really trying to use bigger lineups, you need to make sure that you actually have someone dependable at that 5 spot. And Jalen Smith doesn't really fit that bill.
I mean, for me, like, if there's a world where you really think Jalen Smith can develop and be your backup big of the future, he's going to shoot threes. He's got a good. He was a shot blocking extraordinaire in college. If you think that he could be kind of like your what Rob Williams is to above the rim play, if you think Jalen Smith could develop to that to be on the arc, and you're going to get the similar defense, similar length, similar like a bit of athleticism, but Jalen Smith thrives as a pick and pop guy, then my advice would be wait till the off season, wait till Cantor's off the books, gauge the market for him, and don't be limited by that $4.6 million. But also don't feel like you need to offer that if there's other teams that if no one's showing interest in you can pick him up for 2. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that sometimes it's best to be patient and see what the market is for him, because obviously teams know that this is happening. They know that whoever trades for them is really going to struggle to keep him, because if some team is really enamored with him, they're going to come in and just offer 5 or 6 million a year. So it's best to just wait till the off season. If you still got interest and there's a mutual interest back, you've already moved off from one of the roadblocks to some playing time for him. Al Horford's got one last year on his contract. It's only partially guaranteed. You know, maybe you look to flip Horford down the line if you feel that Smith's actually providing something of value. Then doing that in the offseason makes a lot of sense. Doing it now, to me, is just nonsensical.
Fair enough. And I
Awesome.
think that ties a little
We're
knot to
done.
it.
We're done. Done.
Yeah,
Right.
that's it.
Which means before we go, make sure to like, subscribe, share, do all the good stuff. Help us grow as a channel. Help us help you, or at least help us entertain you. Help us help you seems a little bit conceited, to be fair.
Yeah.
Make sure. Also, if you like what you see, you know, I'm producing content daily across social media. So's Tim. Some days I'm consistent somewhere, some days I'll be somewhere else. So if you follow me across the board, you're always going to get more of me. Tim's usually floating around on Twitter. His Instagram's on here, but you know, he don't really mess with Instagram. So what I'd suggest is make sure you follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, and make sure you follow Tim on Twitter to see some of these dope edits. If you like the thumbnails, Tim's the one behind all of that jazz. And we will catch you again later in the week when we will actually start looking at some viable, and I say viable, players that will fit the way the Boston Celtics want to play, that are roughly attainable at the wing position. Tim, do you want to let these guys know that they should have a good day, guys and girls?
Cheers. Enjoy your evening, and good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Namaste.